Hello, and welcome to this lesson on writing and invention. I hope that you enjoy this chapter that you'll be reading, two chapters that you'll be reading this week from The Subject is Writing. And I'm going to overview some of the subjects contained in those two chapters and just explore a little bit with you. So you can watch this lesson before or after you read. I think it can be beneficial either way. So I'm going to share my lesson with you and we'll dive right into it. And writing and invention. So, writing is an inventive and creative process. It is not just a function. Um, it's a learning process. So that's what we're going to dive in today. And I'm really excited to share with you about this because I feel that oftentimes we do look at writing as somewhat always as a task, as a means to an end. We're forced to write when in fact writing is is an incredible tool for actual learning and for memory and all sorts of wonderful things. So let's talk about how writing is this tool. So, writing is more than just a functional activity. I mean, I know we have to use it for email. You're going to have to write research papers in college. I mean, these are all parts of the writing process. But we can also look as writing as look at it from a different aspect that through writing we actually achieve learning. So writing has this incredible power to improve and stimulate memory. So, for example, if I say, hey, I want you to write a childhood memory out for me, what will most likely happen is that as you're writing, your memory is going to jog through this process and you're going to actually formulate more memories and more descriptions than you could without having done a writing project. So it's really cool in that way. It fosters insight and constructs new knowledge. So I'm not a big journaler, but I do try to journal small paragraphs each day just so that I can somehow begin to process what's going on internally for me. So that's what my journaling is for. It's more for personal reasons to try and kind of talk, and for mine is a bit spiritual as well. I'm trying to talk to God, and writing for me is often a way that I can do that. So in my journal, I'll begin to write, and by the time I'm done writing, I have said quite a few things that honestly I didn't even know I had in me, if that makes sense. So it constructs new knowledge as we write. That's the power of free writing, of writing without restriction, something that we're not used to because we've grown up in an environment with so many rules. You know, we've been taught grammar and form and all of these rules that actually limit us, that make us not want to write anymore, when in fact those rules should come last. They should come after invention. So the other part is that writing can accelerate learning, and it helps us explore ourselves and our environment. So we can use writing as an opportunity to really move our learning quicker. So if I ask you, for example, which I will do a lot, to discuss what you read and write about it, you're actually going to retain that information longer because you've also read it, written about it, thought about it, so forth. And the amazing thing about writing is that it's a uniquely human tool. It's a powerful tool that we have. And so writing, and I'm sure we've all experienced in some way or another. We've read something, a quote, a poem, lyrics. You know, we've read these things and we've been impacted by them by just reading the written word. And then again, we've written words ourselves, and they have the power now with the internet to go all over the world. And I don't want to be too idealistic, but that power of writing to me is so real that it holds a lot of weight for me. I think, wow, the fact that I'm able to write, form sentences, communicate with people through writing is a really incredible gift that we have as human beings. So writing is not just the hum and drum, I gotta do it. I mean, sometimes it can be droll, sometimes it can be, I mean, it can be a tough process, especially when you're working to meet the expectations of a particular class or you're trying to write a book. I mean, it's a grinding process. It's not for the faint of heart, but writing is an incredibly rewarding skill. So we're going to continue to become better writers throughout this course. Okay, so I went ahead and did the activity from the book where Tia Wolf, she mentions, well, just start doing a Venn diagram and see how your memory starts to connect certain ideas. So I started off with the subject. I just took the word books. I enjoy reading, so I thought I'm going to do books. The first book that came to my mind is Pride and Prejudice because I'm currently reading it. And so I thought, oh, Pride and Prejudice. And then when I thought about Pride and Prejudice, I thought about a time back when I was 18. I had an opportunity to visit Bath, England, which is where the Jane Austen Center is, and that's where a lot of her books take place. And it just brought back these very fond memories of my, my early adulthood, and how this book has had a major impact on me. Second thing I thought about immediately are libraries. And then when I thought about libraries, I thought about COVID-19, where all the libraries have closed. And I tend to spend a lot of time at the library. It's a great place for me to study and a quiet place for me to just read. So I really enjoy that. And then along with libraries, I thought about all the really cool libraries that I've visited. That's kind of a hobby of mine. If I go to a town and I know they have a cool library, I'm going to go there. So I've been to the Stockholm Library, the UW Library. I want to visit the Dublin Library, some libraries in Austria that are just unimaginable. And then I thought about Beauty and the Beast, and it went on and on, right? I thought about Goodreads, which is where kind of my favorite social media platform, which is where I basically just log the books that I've read and rate them and share it with my friends. And so if you like to read, Goodreads is a great, great platform. But I thought about how I learned about Goodreads when I was in New Zealand. Someone told me about it, and I thought, oh my goodness, why am I not doing this? I thought about my 2020 book list and what I've read so far, and my goals for the end of the year in reading. And so it's all these little connections started happening. I thought about my book club. I'm in a book club, and you might think I'm just like the nerdiest person at this point, but I really do enjoy reading. And so I have a book club, but I don't just enjoy reading, I enjoy talking about what I've read. And so when I share books with friends and we talk about them, there's a really wonderful friendship that takes place from that. I love talking about books with friends because we often talk about human nature, especially in novels. So right now in Pride and Prejudice, we're talking a lot about just how well Jane Austen knew about human nature. And then lastly, I have a good friend. We're in a book club together, and he's from Japan. And so I just had these connections, and we read a book about Japan. So it's amazing how all of these things were just, I mean, they didn't take any time at all for me to collect these. And so now I looked at it and I thought, okay, what's interesting about this? So the first thing that I noticed is that there is some rich bits. So when I looked over my list, that Venn diagram, I saw a connection. With each little connection, I always had a place that I traveled to, or a place that I want to travel to. And I've noticed that travel and the places that I've been have strong connections to books. And so usually for me, oftentimes I've read something and that compels me to want to go to the location. So I grew up reading books from British literature. So I always wanted to go to England. So and so on and so forth. And there's just these incredible connections. And so once we do this brainstorming, this inventive process, we actually can start to extract from our memory some very interesting connections that we might never have known before. And I'm going to be real with you, I'd never known that before. That's so interesting. I was like, everything is connected to a location because there's really strong memories related to those travel experiences and the books that I've read. So there's something there that I'm sure I could probably write something about and enjoy. So that's the beautiful process of invention. So the goal with this is what we call synthesize or synthesis. Synthesis is a tool you will develop throughout the course of your college writing, and that's where you're combining new information with previously learned information to create new and complex, complete structures of understanding. So the idea is that, say, for example, I want to do a project on Jane Austen. I'm writing an essay about her. And I have personal experience, personal knowledge of her books because I've read them. But then I go online and I begin to read about a particular person's history of her life. And what I can do is I can begin to combine the information to create something new, to create something complex. And that's part of what synthesis is all about. So it's an incredible tool, and it can be very fun if you're willing to dive in, if you're willing to just explore, be creative, and see if you can come up with new ideas. And you are unique in your experiences, your memory, your life. And that's such a useful tool. I think oftentimes when we write, we forget that we are not a vacuum. We are not like empty space. We have like this incredible uh I don't know, history, personal history. There's probably things that you know so much about that I know nothing about. And that's one of my favorite parts about teaching writing is that oftentimes from my students, I learn so much because we just have different backgrounds and history. And so we're going to be doing that this semester. We're going to be synthesizing some of, your personal experiences with some new ideas and developments and try to help you come up with ideas that you're proud of and that push us to think more and explore more. So I really enjoyed the idea of the activity from page 7. And so I would really like you to try and do this. Even if it only takes you like 10-15 minutes, you can just scribble it out on a piece of paper. But I'd like you to recreate an argument you've had with someone, but approach the argument from the other person's point of view. So include not only the spoken part of the argument, but also the thoughts of the person you argued against. This is a fun one. I don't know about you, I hate being in an argument. That is just the worst. But trying to understand where another person is coming from is a fun exploratory process because you're you're becoming you're seeing yourself as the audience and the other person as the mind in which you are trying to I guess put it all together. So how does that person respond internally to the things you did and said during the argument? When you consider the argument from his or her viewpoint, can you better understand why he or she responded to you in the way he or she did? So I'm going to have you complete this activity. It doesn't have to be super long, but just to start explaining an argument, try to think about one, recreate one. Maybe you've had one, I don't know, recently. But if you're willing to upload this to the discussion board, I will offer extra credit because I think it's a very interesting exercise and it might actually benefit us. So I'll make sure to add that and hopefully you'll take advantage of it. So the next thing that Wolf talks about is metaphors and similes. Metaphors and similes, they never get old. They help make our writing fun and interesting, and they connect new ideas. So metaphors are comparisons between like things. Are they fundamental building blocks of all interpretive endeavors? They tap into our most basic ways of knowing about the world through our senses and bodily motion. So in Wolf's article, she talks about how she compares her, I think it's I don't know if I'll say probably for me, it was physics. That was like my very worst class that I've ever taken. And she uses the comparison of eating a rotten cherry and how just terrible it is in your mouth. And so putting these two things together, all of a sudden it really explodes our senses. And even in writing has the power to do this. Sometimes people might say, it's raining, cats and dogs outside. That's kind of like a common statement that people will say to indicate these are huge raindrops coming down. And of course, there's ones that you can do that they're much more creative, and they don't even have to be cliche. They can be from your own experiences, but they tend to draw the reader in. So using metaphors to redefine a problem, idea, or situation gives us and our audience an entirely new perspective. I'm going to encourage you throughout the process of writing in college, writing in my class, that metaphors and similes are powerful. They make your writing interesting. We do not have to be boring writers. I think as soon as people think college writing or they think research writing, they think boring. That is so boring. I mean, that was my first reaction when I took college writing. But I've come to find that writing really is as interesting and fun as you decide you want it to be. Most of the time, teachers will accept, boring, voiceless kind of writing. But when they have a student who turns in something that they've given thought to, that they've tried to bring in the descriptive body senses from and bodily motions from us, it's a very attractive way to read as an audience because we really get engaged in what you're writing, and it opens up. I think the biggest compliment that was ever given to me when I was writing is I would have instructors say, I've never thought about it like this before. And really, that's kind of what you're getting at. As students, I am not the sole authority on writing, and I I don't consider myself a better writer than my students. I believe we're all writers working toward becoming better writers individually. And so I love it when students turn things into me that I'm like, wow, this is so creative. And it's something I've never really thought about before. So I appreciate that kind of your perspective and the fun and interesting aspects that you try to bring to your writing. Okay, and last but not least, I'm going to cover a couple things about invention throughout the writing process. I mentioned before, writing is a grueling process. It is not always easy. I don't want to sugarcoat anything for you. I have struggled as a writer, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in the future, but I have kind of a very critical writing, how do you say it, in my mind, where I really struggle thinking, oh, this isn't good enough, or this isn't going to be clear enough, or I didn't use the right comma in the right place. And it's probably a very, a reflection of my personality in some ways. But either way, I get writer's block like everybody else. I stare at the screen and I think, what am I going to do? I do not know what I'm going to do. But writer's block, there are ways to get out of it. So even when I or another instructor, they give you a writing assignment, and I think the hardest part, and I will attest to this from being in college for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years now, the biggest challenge is often starting. It's not so much the actual writing, it's not so much the actual revision of your writing, it's actually starting. And I think we can all be honest here and say we've all procrastinated, we've all waited to the very last moment because we've dreaded the assignment, and so we just don't do it. But truly, as soon as you get a writing assignment, if you can take 10 to 15 minutes to do one of these things or multiple items on this, you will thank yourself, because when you go to actually write, you won't be so stuck. You'll actually have some ideas to get you going. The first one is free writes. This means that you set a timer on your phone or you set a timer on your computer, and you do not stop writing, and you just write without any inhibition. You don't worry about commas, you don't worry about capitalization, you don't worry about spelling, you don't worry about if this is making sense. You literally write anything and everything that comes to your mind regarding the subject that you want to write about. It can be very powerful. I did something earlier this year in the middle of when we were having COVID-19, and or last year, I just decided, I was like, I need to write some stuff out because something is taking place, and I really want to explore what's going on. And throughout that writing process, I actually created a new idea, something that I thought, man, I could write about this in the future. It's very interesting. And so from that free write, which I'm not used to doing, I found that when I go back and read it, there are like nuggets, things that I'm pulling out that I'm like, this would be great. This would be an awesome topic. And so the other one is list making, just jotting down bullet points, quick things that you can write about, metaphors, examples, personal stories. These are things that bring your writing to life. Sticky notes and Venn diagrams, use them all the time, especially for public speaking. When I know I have to make a speech, I will put sticky notes up and try to organize them in a way that I'm like, this makes more sense. Great tool. If you're like me, I am a verbal processor, which means that I usually need to talk out my ideas before I can write about them. I really want to discuss them, and I want to, even just talking to myself, which I do very often, is really helpful. So if you're going to verbal process something, where you're alone in your room or with your dog, and you want to just talk out what you want to write about, just make sure you click that record button on your phone so that you can hear yourself later and don't lose those ideas. And then the other one that the book mentions is asking questions. Write out a list of questions: who, what, when, where, why, how. Those questions can help you form new ideas, new points within an essay, within a writing context, can be very helpful. So this is the last of the presentation. I really hope you enjoy the chapters. There's going to be discussion questions, and I look forward to reading your writing this week. So thank you so much for listening, and please feel free to contact me if you have any questions.